Hey, it's Kyle here, and I know this is coming out a little bit late, but I wanted to do a recap of DragonCon 2019. I wanted to do something immediately afterwards, but I got super busy at work, so there's a few days after DragonCon that I was just trying to catch up on work stuff. And then the following week, I had to go out of town for a few days for a work conference, so I literally just got back from that conference. So I better sit down now and do this DragonCon recap video where I'm just never going to get around to it. Couple major highlights first. Another channel I'm part of, Project Nerdy on YouTube. A couple of the members of that channel, Kat and Reb, were also at DragonCon. Reb was actually staying with me during his visit from London. So it's neat to have a little bit of a YouTube reunion with some people that I've known on YouTube for a long, long time. I've met Kat before in person in real life, but this is the first time I've ever got a chance to meet Reb in real life, so that was awesome. I also got to meet one of our fans from Project Nerdy, so that was very, very cool. The Dragon Con parade, as always, was awesome. All the cosplay at Dragon Con was amazing. It was awesome. But I thought I would go. I'm going to apologize when we look at my phone because I have the schedule of stuff I did at Dragon Con on here. So let me kind of go over what I did at Dragon Con 2019. All right, so first up on Friday, sorry, getting the right day here. Um, I started off my Dragon Con experience. We're going with a science panel. Actually, that's something I've started doing the last couple of years when been going to Dragon Con. I've been going to more of the science panels, which are really interesting and fun. And a lot of times they do try to connect them with nerdy aspects of pop culture. So the first one I attended was How Do You Time Travel? And it was basically a panel of some scientists. And they were kind of exploring how time travel is depicted in various movies and TV shows, and what's more realistic about them, what would be the scientific issues with how they depict time travel. If they could depict time travel in a movie, how they would do it. It was a very interesting panel. I enjoyed that one a lot. Next up, I attended a 10th anniversary panel for Warehouse 13. If you may is not familiar with Warehouse 13, it was a show on the Sci-Fi Channel for, I think it ran for about 4 or 5 years. Absolutely loved the show. It was one of my favorite sci-fi shows of all time. Had a great mixture of humor, exploring elements of history, some cool sci-fi elements, great cast, great concept. I loved Warehouse 13. And this is the second time at DragonCon I've attended a panel with some of the stars from the show. And it's always very entertaining. So love that one. Next up, I attended a reading of William Shakespeare's Star Wars, The Force Doth Awaken. If you're not familiar, author Ian Dosher writes these Shakespearean adaptations of the Star Wars movies, episodes now 1 through 8. And it's basically like what if Shakespeare had written Star Wars. So it's very fun. They're always very humorous and entertaining. In the past few years at DragonCon, the Star Wars track at the event always does a performance of one of the books. It's usually become more of a live reading, but this year they actually did a little bit more with costumes and stuff like this. And they did The Force Doth Awaken, and it was awesome. I always make sure I go to whatever one they're reading that year. Then on Friday, had a little bit of a gap there. That's when me, Kat, and Reb, and our YouTube fan hung out a little bit. But then had 2 more panels on Friday. First, I attended a panel on Southern science fiction, which featured some authors from the South who write in the science fiction genre, and they kind of talked about how being from the South shaped their writing style, how it impacts how they write science fiction, how the Southern science fiction writers are different from other parts of the country, and why that is, the aspects of Southern culture that kind of influences their style and stuff like that. So that's a topic I never really had heard much about, exploring sci-fi that's specifically written by authors from the South, and that was kind of very interesting. I wasn't sure how much I'd enjoy that panel, but I really did. I liked it a lot. And then my last panel on Friday was a Star Wars panel. It was a panel of several Star Wars authors, and that included Kevin J. Anderson, Claudia Gray, E.K. Johnston, Timothy Zahn, then Michael Stackpole, and it was very entertaining. One reason I always love going to that one is a couple of those. I forgot Brian Young as well. Kevin Anderson, Timothy Zahn specifically, I've read a ton of those books. Kevin J. Anderson was one of the first kind of like real novels I read with some of his books. Timothy Zahn is one of my favorite authors of all time. And a lot of those are the ones I've read as well. So I always enjoy hearing any of the Star Wars authors, and that panel was awesome. Probably my first day, that Star Wars author panel was probably my favorite. Close second would be the Shakespearean play and time travel in science fiction. Saturday was a busy day. Started off with the Dragon Con Parade, which is amazing. If you've never been to Dragon Con, I'd recommend going just for the Dragon Con Parade. I'm not going to try to explain all the aspects of it. Literally, just go into YouTube and search for Dragon Con Parade 2019. I'm sure all sorts of great video and images will come up, and check that out. Next, I attended, not surprisingly, another Star Wars panel, Resistance, Rebels, and Clone Wars, which was basically about the animated series. I did not plan on attending that one. That was actually supposed to be a different Star Wars topic, but they had changed the panel after the schedule got released, and I'd already got to the room, and I was kind of late because I was coming from the parade. And I just thought, like, well, I'm just going to stick around. So it was interesting. I didn't really enjoy as much as the other ones because I'm not really as into the animated shows, mainly because I've never had the time to watch a lot of them. I do at some point, but that's just not a big part of my Star Wars fandom. So it wasn't one of my favorite panels, but I still enjoyed it. Next up, I did Star Wars versus Star Trek Science. That one's a lot of fun. This is the second year in a row they've done this one, where they have basically two scientists on each side, Star Wars and Star Trek, and they basically debate back and forth how science is depicted in each franchise and which one does a better job with it. And they do it with a very humorous take on it. So they're joking around. They're giving a lot of funny examples. Love that one. Next one was one I attended that it was kind of, I just found it interesting. I wasn't really super familiar with the topic, but I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I think I want to check that out. And it's Famous Unsolved Codes, New Information About the Crypto Sculpture at the CIA. I'd heard of that sculpture before, but I didn't really know a lot of the backstory about the process trying to break the code. And basically, the speaker is one of the foremost experts on this code. In general, I don't really know a whole lot about code breaking, so it's come from an academic standpoint. It was really interesting to find about how code breakers approach trying to decipher stuff like that. It was interesting. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I did go to that one. Next, I attended Cities of the Future. I probably attended that because of my job, where I work for a local city and we do a lot of planning. And it was basically some people, some experts kind of looking at like how cities will be in the future, not in movies and stuff, but in our real future. There was aspects I really enjoyed. The one thing the panel suffered from, it didn't have an urban planner on the panel, and I felt like that was the one aspect they needed. Because a lot of times when people were asking questions, they would kind of say, like, oh, that's more of an urban planning thing and not really our field of expertise. But other than that, that was not really a negative aspect of that panel. The rest of it I found interesting. And then took a little time. I skipped a panel and kind of walked the Marriott Marquis lobby, which is the main cosplay hangout. Checked out a lot of the awesome cosplay, which is awesome as always. And then the last panel I attended on Saturday was the Year in Science, which is basically a panel of scientists in a variety of fields, and they kind of touch on some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs in the past year. A lot of cool stuff, a lot of stuff I hadn't heard of that take place the past year in the field of science in regard to discoveries. So it was really, really cool. Sunday, started off with a panel, an hour with Chewbacca, sorry, Let the Wookiee Win. And basically that's the new actor who now plays Chewie in the Star Wars movies, was at Dragon Con. So he kind of talked about his experience of playing Chewie, how it was to, start playing that role. He answered a lot of questions. Really fun guy, really great spirit. You tell like he's a Star Wars fan. He kind of enjoys being Chewie. So that panel was very awesome. The next up, probably one of the more impressive things I saw at Star Wars. They do this every year in the Star Wars track. I said Star Wars, I meant Dragon Con. Sorry, it's been a long day. That was Star Wars Trivia Final. And basically on Saturdays, which I've never done this, mainly because after seeing the finals, I know there's no chance I'd even make the finals. They do a test on Star Wars knowledge. It's a written test, multiple choice. And if you score a certain level, you make it to this finals. And then basically they do several rounds of questions, and they crown the Star Wars Trivia King or a queen at Dragon Con, and the questions are insanely hard. Uh, Basically, the finals this year was 10 people, and they first do 10 questions. Um, each person gets 10 questions, and then they narrow it down to five. Then those five get 10 more questions, and they narrow it down to the final two. This year it was the final three because there was a tie for they couldn't get it quite down to the final two. Uh, and the questions are hard. Like I mean, all those hundreds of questions they asked, I might have known like 20% of them. And I consider myself a big Star Wars nerd, but these are some really hard questions. So it's always a lot of fun to see what questions they ask and what these people actually know in it. Took another little break to kind of do some more cosplay checking out. Then I attended Sci-Fighters, the all Nicolas Cage match, and this is basically every year this track classic sci-fi kind of does like a little tournament style thing and lets the people in the audience vote on the winner. This year's topic was which Nick Cage character in a movie is the most Nick Cage of all time, and people in the audience got to nominate, and then they voted who won each round. It was a lot of fun. I'm not really going to say who's going to win because the winner was kind of an inside joke. It really doesn't make sense unless he was there. But it was a lot of fun, very humorous. I really, really enjoyed it. And actually got a little decal they made for that panel, which is really cool. Next up was the Amazing Sci-Fi Worlds of Steven Spielberg. That one just kind of explored all the aspects of science fiction that Steven Spielberg's worked and the influence he's had on the genre. How he shaped it, how it was so different from when he first started to where it is now. It was very cool to kind of see almost like a career retrospective on Steven Spielberg. And then the Life in Space astronaut Dr. Stephen Robinson, so that's an actual astronaut, did several missions in space. He's probably the most famous one. He was on the mission when John Glenn went back to space. He was also on the first mission back when they restarted the shuttle program after the last shuttle disaster. So he kind of just talked about his experience in space and what it's like to be an astronaut in space, and it was really amazing. Some of the images he shared from when he was in space was breathtaking. And then my last panel I attended that day was a play presented by the Atlanta Radio Theater. And they basically adapted work by H.P. Lovecraft into a radio play, and they performed it live on the stage, but they did it just like a radio play with people doing the sound effects and all that type of stuff. It was really cool to see that in person. It was awesome. On Monday, the last day of the con, and Monday, if you've never been to Dragon Con, it's kind of like a half a day, so there's not as much stuff going on. It kind of ends by about mid-afternoon, so people can kind of start heading to the airport if they're flying out, that type of stuff, checking out the hotels. So the first panel I attended was Radicalism, Resistance, and Rebellion in Star Wars. That panel was absolutely fascinating because the members of the panel were all Star Wars fans, but they're people that have background in the armed forces. There's even one of the people on the panel works for a company, and her job is to analyze global terrorism and how it will impact their business. So they kind of took their lens of expertise of kind of dealing with terrorism in their real life in combat and in rebellions and resistance and all that type of stuff, and seeing how it's depicted in Star Wars in various different ways and how that relates to how it actually happens in the real world. And it was kind of interesting to see Star Wars connected that way to stuff that actually happens today in the world. This topic I've never seen really explored at Dragon Con before. I'm not sure if there's been a panel like that before, and I just have not attended. But I was really glad that I attended this one. Next up was a fan-led panel about the women of Firefly. They basically examined the really main female characters of Firefly and how each one had their own strengths and weaknesses, what they loved the most about them. I'm a huge Firefly fan, so it was just nice to be around with other Firefly fans and just talk about what they love about the show and the movie. Then I attended another panel featuring Timothy Zahn. This one, he was talking about his newest book, Thrawn Treason. I always go see Timothy Zahn when he's at Dragon Con. He's one of my favorite, if not my favorite author of all time. The character he created, Grand Admiral Thrawn, is my favorite Star Wars character of all time. So I always love seeing Timothy Zahn at Dragon Con. I absolutely loved it. And then the last panel I attended at DragonCon was Voyagers in interstellar space, and it was basically an individual who actually worked on the Voyager program, both satellites, and kind of explored what it was like when those satellites left our solar system and what it was like to be working on that project when that happened, all the stuff that they've learned from that taking place, what the Voyager satellites are up to now because they're still functioning and sending data back to Earth. Um, that was really, really cool. And I really enjoyed it. So that was my panels I attended at DragonCon this year. Like I said, another cool aspect is checking out all the cosplay. I don't cosplay myself, but just seeing what all people cosplay is always amazing. DragonCon is also basically just one giant long party the entire Labor Day weekend in Atlanta. So I'd really encourage, if you like going to nerdy cons, if you like cosplay, if you like some of the panels I said sounded interesting to do, try to attend DragonCon once, even if you're not in the Atlanta area. I really recommend it. It is an awesome time. If you like to follow what I'm up to when I'm at DragonCon and other stuff as I travel around, follow me on Instagram. It's Kyle Unexpected. And if you have attended DragonCon in the past, let me know in the comment section below what is some of the favorite things you've done at DragonCon. Hope you enjoyed the video. I know this is a long one. I apologize that, but I did a lot of DragonCon, so I knew it was going to take me a while to talk about it. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe I'll see you at a future DragonCon. See you next time.